They never thought I'd show up. Not after everything. But there I was, standing in the parking lot of the Riverside Community Center, watching my family file into what they called the most important event of our generation. My hands trembled as I smoothed down my dress, the navy blue one I'd bought specifically for this moment, hoping someone would notice I'd made an effort. No one did. The invitation had never come. I found out about the celebration through a Facebook post my cousin shared, tagged with everyone except me. Honoring the Mitchell family legacy, 3 generations of achievement. My stomach dropped. When I read it, 3 generations. I was part of those 3 generations, wasn't I? Before we continue, drop a comment. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it there? I'd love to know how far this story is reaching. Because right now, feeling this invisible, knowing someone out there is listening means everything. I'd called my sister first. "Oh," she said when I mentioned the event, her voice flat with surprise. "I thought Dad told you." He hadn't. Then I called Dad. "Well, it's not really... the venue is small, and we already sent the head count." Translation: you weren't included in the head count. I called my aunt, the family matriarch who organized everything from birthday parties to funerals. "Sweetie," she said in that patronizing tone, "this is really for the contributors, the people who've made a mark, you know?" I knew exactly what she meant. I wasn't a contributor. I was just Sarah, the one who'd moved away for college and never moved back. The one who chose a different path, worked in nonprofit instead of the family real estate business. The one who asked too many questions at family dinners and made people uncomfortable with my ideas about change and growth. But I came anyway, because some part of me still believed I belonged. The coldness hit me the moment I walked through those doors. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes found me, then quickly looked away. I heard my name whispered behind hands, followed by shaking heads and knowing looks. My Uncle Jerry, stationed near the entrance like a bouncer, actually looked surprised to see me. "Sarah, how did you... good to see you." The programs were already printed, glossy, professional, with gold lettering that spelled out the evening's agenda. I flipped through mine with growing dread. Welcome remarks by Aunt Patricia, opening presentation by my father, recognition of family achievements by my sister Jennifer, musical interlude by cousin Michael, closing thoughts by Uncle Jerry. My name appeared nowhere. Not as a presenter, not as an honoree, not even in the family tree diagram that took up the center spread. But there, in tiny print at the bottom of page 3, was an acknowledgement that made my chest tighten. Special, thanks to Sarah Mitchell for research assistance and slide preparation. Research assistance. As if I hadn't spent 3 months diving into family archives, tracking down old photographs, interviewing elderly relatives, and crafting the narrative that would tonight be presented as my father's work. I found a seat in the back row, next to the Mitchell family friends I barely recognized. The family table stretched across the front of the room, decorated with white roses and flickering candles. Empty chairs were reserved with small cards bearing names. Reserved for Patricia, reserved for Jim, reserved for Jennifer. No card for me. Even my cousin's 3-year-old daughter had a place at that table, a booster seat with her name written in careful cursive. The slideshow began, and my stomach clenched with recognition. Photo after photo that I had scanned, cropped, and arranged. Stories I had helped craft, quotes I had suggested, historical details I had researched in dusty library archives and forgotten file boxes. My father stood at the podium, confident and commanding, presenting his work on our family's journey from Irish immigrants to successful American entrepreneurs. "The Mitchell family has always been defined by determination," he said, clicking to a slide I'd spent hours perfecting. by the willingness to work hard and support each other through every challenge. The irony burned in my throat. Support. Each other. Unless you were sitting in the back row, uninvited and unacknowledged. When the recognition portion began, I watched my sister take the stage to honor family members who have made significant contributions to our legacy. She spoke about Dad's business acumen, Uncle Jerry's community service, Aunt Patricia's dedication to family traditions. She mentioned my cousin David's military service, my cousin Lisa's successful medical practice, even my teenage nephew's Eagle Scout achievement. She never mentioned my master's degree in social work, my decade of service helping underprivileged families, or the nonprofit I'd helped establish that had served thousands of children. She never mentioned that I'd been the one to suggest this event in the first place, 2 years ago at Christmas dinner, when I'd proposed celebrating our family's story before the older generation was gone forever. Instead, she smiled at the family table and said, "Of course, there are many others who contribute in their own quiet ways, supporting from the sidelines." Supporting from the sidelines. As if invisibility was my chosen role, not something that had been assigned to me. The applause felt hollow. I clapped along, my hands moving mechanically while my heart hammered against my ribs. Around me, family friends nodded approvingly at the touching tribute to family unity. They had no idea that the person who had made this evening possible was sitting among them, erased from the very story she had helped tell. During the intermission, I escaped to the hallway. The community center's corridor was lined with local art and community announcements, a sharp contrast to the formal elegance inside the main hall. I stood by a bulletin board advertising yoga classes and book clubs, ordinary life continuing, while my world felt like it was crumbling. Not enjoying the party? I turned to find my Uncle Jerry approaching with 2 cups of punch. He handed me one, though I hadn't asked for it. "It's lovely," I said, the lie smooth on my tongue. "You all did a beautiful job." He nodded, sipping his punch thoughtfully. "You know, Sarah, not everyone is meant to be in the spotlight. Some people are more, supportive, background players, and that's important too." Background players. The punch tasted like artificial fruit and disappointment. "Of course," I managed. "Take tonight, for instance. Someone had to do the research, right? Someone had to put together all those slides and documents. That's valuable work, even if it's not the kind of thing you get recognized for publicly." He knew. He knew exactly what I'd contributed, and he was telling me in the kindest possible way that it didn't matter. That my role was to remain invisible, to support the family story without being part of it. "Family is about knowing your place," he continued, his tone gentle but firm. "Everyone has a role to play. Some people are natural leaders, born to be in front. Others are better suited to other things." I smiled and nodded because that's what I'd always done. I'd always been the agreeable one, the one who didn't make waves or demand attention, the one who absorbed slights and swallowed hurt feelings. To keep the peace? "Well," I said, raising my cup in a mock toast, "here's to knowing your place." He clinked his cup against mine, missing the bitter irony in my voice entirely. Back inside, the evening continued. Cousin Michael performed a piano piece that received a standing ovation. More stories were shared, more family bonds celebrated. I sat in my back row seat, feeling increasingly disconnected from the narrative unfolding before me. During my father's closing remarks, he spoke about legacy and the importance of passing down family values to future generations. He talked about hard work, integrity, and the obligation to lift each other up. The words rang hollow in my ears. How could you lift up someone you'd never bothered to see? As he spoke, I found myself remembering other moments of invisibility. The Christmas when I'd brought my college boyfriend home, and no one had thought to set an extra place at dinner. The birthday when everyone forgot to call except my grandmother, who had dementia but somehow still remembered. The job promotion I'd earned that went unmentioned in family newsletters, while my cousin's new car purchase merited a full paragraph of congratulations. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to prove myself worthy of their attention. The elaborate gifts I'd given that were forgotten within weeks. The family events I'd traveled cross-country to attend, only to be treated like a distant acquaintance. The countless times I'd bitten my tongue when family discussions turned to politics or social issues, not wanting to be labeled the troublemaker who challenged their comfortable worldview. Slowly, quietly, I'd begun to disappear from my own family. Not all at once, but in small increments. Fewer invitations to major events, less frequent phone calls, holiday plans made without consulting my schedule. It had been so gradual that I'd almost convinced myself it was natural, that families simply grew apart as children became adults and established their own lives. But tonight made it clear. This wasn't natural drift. This was deliberate exclusion, carefully maintained and systematically enforced. I wasn't fading from the family story. I was being written out of it. The main program concluded with another round of applause and the announcement that refreshments would continue to be served in the adjacent reception hall. Families began to move toward the exit, chattering excitedly about the evening's presentations. I remained in my seat, watching the family table empty. The white roses looked wilted now under the harsh fluorescent lights. The reserved name cards seemed to mock me with their careful calligraphy, each one a reminder of my absence from the inner circle. Sarah? I looked up to find Mrs. Chen, one of my father's longtime business associates, standing beside my row. She was an elegant woman in her 70s, someone I'd known peripherally for years but had never spoken to at length. I wanted to tell you, she said, lowering her voice, that I recognized your work in tonight's presentation. The research, the historical narrative structure, even some of the specific phrasing. It was beautifully done. My throat tightened with unexpected emotion. Someone had seen me. Someone had noticed. Thank you, I whispered. She patted my shoulder gently. In my experience, the people who do the real work rarely get the recognition they deserve. But the work stands on its own merit, doesn't it? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without crying. As she walked away, I sat alone in the emptying hall, surrounded by the detritus of celebration. Crumpled programs, forgotten name tags, the lingering scent of coffee and institutional carpet cleaner. This was my family's legacy event, and I was experiencing it as a stranger in my own story. The reception hall buzzed with conversation and laughter. I could see my family through the doorway, clustered around different tables, holding court with friends and extended relatives. My father was deep in conversation with several business associates, probably discussing investment opportunities or community development projects. My sister was showing off photos of her children to a group of family friends, her face bright with maternal pride. They looked complete without me. Happy, successful, connected. A perfect family portrait that required no additional figures. I slipped out through a side door that led to a small courtyard behind the community center. The evening air was cool, against my flushed cheeks, and I welcomed the silence after hours of forced smiles and polite conversation. A few other people had found their way outside, smokers mostly, and a couple having what looked like an intense conversation near the parking lot. I found a bench beneath a small oak tree and sat down, my dress spreading around me like the petals of a wilted flower. Above me, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. I thought about driving home, about ending this evening of humiliation and pretending it had never happened. But something kept me rooted to that bench. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the last flickering hope that someone inside would notice my absence and come looking for me. Maybe it was simply the knowledge that leaving now would confirm everything they believed about me. That I was peripheral, forgettable, someone who could disappear without consequence. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart leaped, thinking someone had finally realized I was missing. Instead, it was my colleague, Maria, checking in about a client case we'd been working on. "Hope your family event is going well," she'd written, followed by a heart emoji. Maria knew more about this evening than most of my relatives did. I'd told her about the months of preparation, the excitement of uncovering family stories, the hope that this event might bridge some of the distance that had grown between us over the years. She'd even helped me practice what I might say if asked to speak, though we both knew that was unlikely. I started to type a response, then stopped. What could I say? That I was sitting alone in a courtyard while my family celebrated inside without me? That I'd spent 3 months creating something beautiful, only to watch others take credit for it? That I felt more connected to my coworkers than to the people who shared my DNA? Instead, I put the phone away and closed my eyes, listening to the distant sound of laughter and conversation filtering through the community center walls. Somewhere in there, my family was building memories I wouldn't be part of, sharing jokes I wouldn't understand, strengthening bonds that didn't include me. I thought about my grandmother, who had died 2 years earlier. She would have noticed my absence tonight. She would have saved me a seat at the family table, insisted that my contributions be acknowledged, made sure I felt included in every conversation. But Grandma Rose was gone, and with her had died the only voice that consistently advocated for my place in the family narrative. The memories came flooding back then, as they always did when I felt most alone. I was 8 years old, sitting in this same grandmother's kitchen while she taught me to make her famous apple pie. The secret ingredient, she'd whispered conspiratorially, is not just love. It's the knowledge that you belong here, in this kitchen, in this family, in this moment. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. I'd carried those words with me through childhood disappointments and teenage insecurities. But somewhere along the way, I'd stopped believing them. The evidence to the contrary had become too overwhelming to ignore. High school graduation, my parents attended but left immediately afterward to go to my cousin's baseball game. College acceptance, my achievement was mentioned briefly at Sunday. Dinner, then overshadowed by discussion of my sister's engagement. Graduate school graduation. I attended alone because it's such a long drive, and we've seen so many graduations already. Each slight had been small enough to dismiss individually, but accumulated over years, they formed a pattern I could no longer deny. I wasn't just the forgotten daughter. I was the daughter who had been systematically trained to expect nothing and be grateful for crumbs. A door opened somewhere behind me, and I heard footsteps on the concrete pathway. I tensed, not ready to face another family member who might want to explain why I didn't really belong inside. There you are. I turned to see Mrs. Patterson, the event coordinator, approaching with a clipboard in one hand and a look of mild panic on her face. She was a professional woman in her 50s who had been hired to manage the logistics of the evening. "I've been looking everywhere for you," she said, slightly out of breath. "We have a situation." My first instinct was to apologize, though I wasn't sure what for. "I'm sorry, I just needed some air." No, it's not that." She sat down on the bench beside me, her clipboard balanced on her knees. "Our closing speaker just called. Jerry Mitchell? He's lost his voice completely. Some kind of throat infection that came on suddenly. He can barely whisper." I stared at her, not understanding why this was my problem. "The thing is," she continued, "we need someone to step in. Someone who knows the family, understands the evening's theme, can wrap things up properly. The other family members are suggesting we just end early, but that feels anticlimactic, you know? After such a beautiful evening." My heart began to pound. "I'm not sure I understand what you're asking." "Your father mentioned that you helped with the research for tonight's presentation, said you know the family history better than anyone. Would you be willing to give some closing remarks? Nothing elaborate. Just a few minutes to tie everything together and thank people for coming." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. They wanted me to speak. After an entire evening of invisibility, they were asking me to be the voice that concluded their Celebration? I don't know, I stammered. I'm not really. I wasn't supposed to be part of the program. Mrs. Patterson leaned forward, her expression earnest. Look, I've been doing events like this for 20 years. I can spot the real storytellers in a family, the ones who actually care about preserving the history and meaning behind the celebration. That's you, isn't it? Something in her voice, the matter-of-fact recognition of what I'd contributed, what I actually was, broke something open inside me. I nodded slowly. Good, she said, standing up. We'll need you in about 10 minutes. Just speak from the heart about what family legacy means. Thank the attendees. Maybe share a meaningful memory or two. You'll be wonderful. She hurried back, inside, leaving me alone with the magnitude of what I'd just agreed to do. 10 minutes to prepare for the moment I'd been unconsciously rehearsing my entire life. The chance to speak my truth to the people who had worked so hard to silence me. Stood up and smoothed my dress again, but this time it felt different. Not like armor I was hoping would protect me, but like clothing that finally fit properly. I walked back toward the community center, my steps steady and purposeful. Inside, the news of the speaker change was spreading through the reception hall. I saw heads turning in my direction, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed surprise. My Aunt Patricia looked genuinely shocked. My sister Jennifer raised her eyebrows and whispered something to her husband. My father approached me as I made my way toward the front of the room. Sarah, are you sure about this? It's wonderful that you're willing to help, but public speaking isn't really my what, Dad? He paused, seeming to recognize something different in my tone. I just meant, well, you're more of a behind-the-scenes person, aren't you? For 35 years, I'd accepted that characterization. Behind the scenes. Supporting player, background contributor, but standing there in my navy blue dress, looking at the microphone that awaited me, I realized something had shifted. Actually, I said quietly, I think I'm exactly the right person for this. Mrs. Patterson appeared at my elbow with a brief introduction written on an index card. Just read this when you're ready, and then the microphone is yours. The reception. Hall gradually quieted as people realized something was happening. Conversations died mid-sentence. Coffee cups were set down on tables. All eyes turned toward the small platform where a microphone stood waiting. I climbed the 3 steps to the platform, my legs steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The microphone was cold and solid in my hand when I adjusted it to my height. The room fell completely silent. Good evening, I began, my voice clear and strong. For those who don't know me, my name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm Jim's daughter, Jennifer's sister, and Patricia's niece. I'm also the person who spent the last 3 months researching and preparing the materials that made tonight's celebration possible. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. From my vantage point on the platform, I could see my family's faces clearly. My father looked stunned. My aunt's mouth had fallen slightly open. My sister was staring at me as if she'd never seen me before. I wasn't supposed to speak tonight, I continued. In fact, I wasn't supposed to be here at all, but sometimes life gives us unexpected opportunities to say the things that need to be said. I paused, letting that sink in. The room remained absolutely silent. This evening, we've heard beautiful tributes to family legacy, to the importance of supporting one another, to the bonds that make us who we are. We've celebrated achievements, recognized contributions, and honored the people who have shaped our family story. I looked directly at my father as I spoke the next words. But I think there's something important we haven't talked about yet. Legacy isn't just about the people who stand in the spotlight. It's also about the people who make that spotlight possible. The researchers, the organizers, the quiet contributors who work behind the scenes not because they prefer invisibility, but because someone has to do the work that holds everything together. My voice grew stronger with each sentence. Years of suppressed thoughts and feelings were finally finding expression. True family legacy is about seeing everyone who contributes, not just the ones who make the most noise or fit the most comfortable. Narrative. It's about recognizing that different doesn't mean lesser, that supporting roles can be just as valuable as leading roles, and that everyone deserves to be acknowledged for their contributions. I could see people throughout the room nodding, particularly some of the family friends who had watched our dynamics play out over the years. Mrs. Chen, who had recognized my work earlier, was smiling with what looked like approval. Tonight, you heard stories about our family's journey from Ireland to America, about the challenges our ancestors faced, and the determination that carried them through. What you may not have heard is that these stories didn't research themselves. The photographs didn't scan and organize themselves. The timeline didn't create itself. My Aunt Patricia had gone very still. My father was looking down at his hands. I spent countless hours in libraries and archives, tracking down documents and conducting interviews with elderly relatives who might not be with us much longer. I did this work not because I was asked to, but because I believed it mattered, because I believed our family story was worth preserving, and I believed I was part of that story. The silence in the room had taken on a different quality now. It wasn't just attention. It was recognition. But here's what I've learned tonight. You don't need permission to be part of your own story. You don't need an invitation to belong to your own family. And you don't need recognition from others to know your own worth. I looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. So I want to thank everyone who came tonight to celebrate our family. I want to thank the people who shared stories and memories. I want to thank Mrs. Patterson for organizing such a beautiful event. And I want to thank my family for giving me the opportunity to speak these words, even if it wasn't exactly the way anyone planned. I paused, preparing for my final words. Family legacy isn't just about the past. It's about how we choose to move forward, how we treat each other, and what we decide to pass down to the next generation. My hope is that we can build a legacy based on inclusion rather than exclusion, on recognition rather than erasure, and on love that makes room for everyone. I set the microphone back in its stand and stepped down from the platform. The applause that followed was different from what I'd heard earlier in the evening. It was sustained, genuine, and came from throughout the room, not just from the family table. As I walked through the crowd, people stopped me to shake my hand and offer words of appreciation. Some were family friends who had witnessed years of family dynamics. Others were relatives I barely knew who seemed to see me clearly for the first time. My father approached me near the refreshment table. His face was flushed and he seemed to be struggling with what to say. "Sarah, I had no idea you felt." "I know you didn't," I said gently. "That's part of the problem." He nodded slowly, understanding passing across his features. "I think we need to talk, really talk, about a lot of things." "I'd like that, Dad." My sister appeared beside us, her usual confident demeanor replaced by something more uncertain. "Sarah, I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "Actually, I owe you several apologies. Starting with tonight." I looked at her, this sister who had been both my closest companion and my greatest source of pain. "Thank you for saying that. Would you like to get coffee sometime this week? Just us." "I'd like that too." The evening wound down gradually after that. People lingered longer than they might have otherwise, engaging in conversations that felt more genuine and substantive than the typical family gathering small talk. Several relatives approached me to share their own experiences of feeling overlooked or undervalued at family events. Mrs. Chen found me again before leaving. "You did something very brave tonight," she said, "and very necessary. Sometimes families need to be reminded of their own values." As the community center emptied and the cleanup began, I found myself helping to stack chairs and fold tables alongside family members who had barely acknowledged my presence hours earlier. The work felt different now, not like invisible service, but like shared responsibility. My Aunt Patricia approached me as I was wiping down a table. Her usual commanding presence seemed diminished, and she looked older than she had at the beginning of the evening. "Sarah, I need to apologize to you," she said, her voice unusually quiet. "I let my own ideas about family hierarchy and traditions blind me to what was right in front of me. You've been contributing to this family for years, and I've been too, stubborn and set in my ways to see it." I stopped wiping the table and looked at her. This was the woman who had controlled family narratives for as long as I could remember, who had determined who belonged and who didn't, who got recognized and who remained invisible. "Thank you for saying that, Aunt Patricia. It means a lot." She nodded, then hesitated. "I wonder, would you be interested in helping plan next year's Christmas gathering? We could use someone with your organizational skills and your perspective." The invitation felt surreal after years of exclusion. But I could see that she meant it, that something had genuinely shifted in her understanding. "I'd be honored to help," I said. As I drove home that night, I replayed the evening's events in my mind. The humiliation of the early hours felt like something that had happened to a different person. The woman who had sat in the back row, accepting invisibility as her natural state, was not the same woman who had spoken truth to her family from a microphone she was never supposed to touch. My phone buzzed with text messages throughout the drive, family members reaching out to continue conversations we'd started. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years expressing appreciation for my words. Even a message from my teenage nephew, saying he'd never realized how much I'd contributed to the family and that he was proud to be related to me. But the message that meant the most came from my grandmother's sister, my great-aunt Eleanor, who was 92 and rarely used technology. Someone had helped her send a text that simply read, "Rose would be so proud. You found your voice tonight, just like she always knew you would." I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at my small house with its carefully tended garden and the life I'd built on my own terms. For years, I'd thought of this place as a refuge from family disappointment. Tonight, it felt like something different. Not a hiding place, but a foundation. A base from which I could engage with my family as an equal, not as someone begging for acceptance. Inside, I changed out of my navy blue dress and hung it carefully in the closet. But I didn't push it to the back with the other rarely worn items. I hung it prominently, where I could see it every morning, a reminder of the night. I stopped accepting invisibility as my inheritance. I made a cup of tea and settled into my favorite chair with a notebook. There were things I wanted to remember about this evening, words I wanted to preserve before they faded. But more than that, there were things I wanted to plan, conversations I wanted to have, relationships I wanted to rebuild on new terms, contributions I wanted to make from a position of recognized value rather than hidden service. As I wrote, I thought about legacy, not just the family legacy we'd celebrated tonight, but the personal legacy I was beginning to create. The legacy of a woman who refused to remain invisible, who spoke her truth even when her voice shook, who claimed her place in her own story. Tomorrow, there would be follow-up conversations, some potentially difficult. There would be relationship dynamics to navigate and new boundaries to establish. There would be the ongoing work of building the kind of family connections I'd always wanted, based on mutual respect rather than tolerated presence. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged. In my own home, writing my own story, no longer waiting for permission to exist fully in my own life. They had said I didn't deserve to be there. Then they handed me the microphone, and I proved them wrong with every word I spoke. Not because I demanded their recognition, but because I finally recognized myself. The most powerful legacy isn't the one that gets written in programs or carved on monuments. It's the one that lives in the moment you stop accepting other people's limitations as your own truth.